Hi and welcome to Lee on the Lectionary. Today we're looking at the readings for the week known as Proper 1 in Year C. Those readings are Isaiah chapter 6 verses 1 to 13, 1 Corinthians 15 verses 1 to 11 and Luke 5 verses 1 to 11. This week's reading from 1 Corinthians 15 shows us how important the physical resurrection of Christ is for the Christian faith. 1 Corinthians 15 verses 1 to 11 tells us three things. First, it says only one gospel is good enough to save us. Then Paul asserts that life after death is at the heart of the gospel. And finally, he declares that it doesn't matter who tells you about it as long as you believe. So firstly, Paul says in verses 1 and 2 that the gospel was preached to them, the Corinthians, they received it, and they took their stand on it. It's by believing this message of good news that they are saved. Otherwise, it's all in vain, it's empty, he says. If we change the message, it becomes useless. If we let go of it, we lose out. But if we hold firmly to it, then we will be saved. So that's the first point. Second, Paul reminds the Corinthians, who seem rather too fond of their own ideas and their own ways of doing things, of what the message was. He says, life after death is at the heart of the gospel. He tells us what is of first importance in the gospel, which is what brings salvation, and that is that Christ died for our sins and that he was raised again to life. His substitutionary atonement, his death in our place for our sins, and his glorious bodily resurrection. The real resurrection of Jesus and the idea of life after death is absolutely fundamental to the Christian message. This is why Christians all over the world and throughout history declare in the Creed, on the third day he rose again. Straightforward, we mean what we say. On the third day he rose again. Jesus in fact appeared in public to his disciples. That's why Paul lists here some of the people that Jesus actually appeared to. 1 Corinthians 15 verses 5 to 8. He appeared to Cephas, another name for Simon Peter. He appeared to the 12 apostles, to Paul himself, and even to 500 people at the same time. Now that couldn't possibly be an hallucination or wishful thinking from bamboozled minds or basic people. It couldn't be some pious spiritual delusion either. No. The word resurrection to first century Jews meant something emphatically physical. Paul even says that many of the witnesses to this event, and it was an event, not a mere academic conception, many of the witnesses were still alive when he was writing. So they could be interrogated, and they could be asked about it, and their reliability as witnesses could be assessed. The truth is out there. And he had been seen and touched and heard by hundreds of people. If that was not true, the early Christian movement would have died out pretty quickly, like every other messianic movement of that century. The logic of history suggests that the best explanation for why billions of people have since believed in the resurrection is that it is, amazingly, true. As Article 4 of the 39 Articles seems to emphasize, Christ did truly rise again from death and took again his body with flesh, bones, and all things appertaining to the perfection of man's nature. So Jesus' resurrection from the dead was not a party trick. He did really die. And when he rose again from the dead, he was not a ghost. He ate and drank with his disciples at Luke 24, 41 to 43. That would be a bit icky if he was a ghost. Doubting Thomas was invited to touch the wounds that Jesus still had from his death on the cross. John 20, 24 to 28. And so were the others. "See my hands and my feet, that it is I myself," said Jesus. "Touch me and see, for a spirit does not have flesh and bones, as you see that I have." He really did have flesh and bones again. So it doesn't matter who tells you about this, says Paul finally. This is the gospel which saves us, the gospel of Jesus Christ, our risen Lord. So accept no substitute gospels, however elevated the messenger might seem to be. Believe in this trustworthy message, no matter how despised or intellectually inferior its advocates might appear. Because without this, your life, and the whole Church of England, is simply righteous religious entertainment to indulge in before we rot and disappear forever.